Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So, this is a little bit of a topic video that I've decided that I wanted to get out because it's been nagging into my mind a lot now. This is about evasion mechanics or dodge mechanics as it's more commonly known, I guess, and why honkaistarrail doesn't implement it, or why I think it's highly unlikely that they ever actually will implement it. Now, before we go on to this topic, let's also acknowledge that the devs have exactly pointed a reason as to why they didn't release a dodge character. In the 2.2 live stream, they mentioned that Aventurine was meant to be this sort of risk reward type of character that sustains your party by sheer luck or dodging. Now, apparently, through their testing, they realized it wasn't gonna happen because Aventurine would be the only character alive in the party, and if your sustain is the only one alive, then he's failed at his job. Now, there could be possible implementation reasons as to why they didn't work. They didn't really specify why. One of those could be that only Aventurine was the one that could dodge, which was obviously going to be a flaw. And, well, if Aventurine is the only one that has defensive utility, obviously it's not going to work out. Or they designed this proto-Aventurine in such a way that everyone did have the dodge, but the dodge was built on defense, and so Aventurine would be much thicker if the luck didn't go off. Again, this is speculation. We didn't really get the exact reason as to why the Aventurine that they designed failed. We only knew that he was supposed to have some sort of evasion mechanic. Aside from that, there's also been a few implementations of what a dodge mechanic is in Star Rail that are pretty similar but not exactly. Like, for example, the latest character Motsa is a pretty close one of what an evasion mechanic in Star Rail could look like. Now, his departed state isn't perfect though, because if this was a real evasion character, Motsa would still get targeted and they would just nullify the damage that they're taking, and that would make the damage taken much less. Another thing too is that being in dodge for too long is not what Motsa wants. Motsa really wants to exit the departed state as fast as possible through follow-up attacks. And if he's in the departed state for too long, he's not doing enough damage, so it sort of doesn't fit his character. He's a damage dealer that does not want to evade for too long. And lastly, departed itself is, selfish, and it doesn't provide outward team defensive utility. Like the proposed Aventurine that we said earlier, if Aventurine was the only one that could dodge, then it doesn't really matter as a defensive tool, and it's not going to be serving your team very well. So Motsa's departed state just really isn't a evasion mechanic that we're looking for. Now, there's also a much more similar mechanic that is present only on enemies, the statues of Argenti that give shields to Argenti. And how these shields work is it doesn't matter how much millions of damage you do, if the shields are up, they will nullify it to zero and then fade away. That is probably the closest thing you could get to an evasion mechanic because the enemy is still targetable. There's no downside to having a shield up, and it effectively nullifies all damage except for maybe DOT, but that's another thing entirely. Now, we've established pretty much that the dodge mechanic is only available to enemies, or Motsa is not a complete dodge. It's not a perfect dodge that you're trying to look for. Now, why do I think it's highly unlikely that we'll actually get a dodge tank? Aside from the fact that they've already tried to make a dodge tank and it just didn't work. Now, the first reason is the number of problems that this would have. Dodge is a pretty binary thing. You either nullify your damage to zero, or you could take 1 million damage, basically. It's a 1 or 0 type of thing that brings a lot of problems when you try to implement it. How exactly are you going to scale the dodge mechanic in a gacha game? Because, okay, if we base the evasion chances of a character based on their attack, then past a point, I guess you just 100% your dodge chance? Like, what are we trying to do here? If we base it on effect res, then once you get 100% effect res, does that mean you just dodge everything? What do we scale a dodge character off of? I want your suggestions to this because I can't really think of one right now that don't have their own sort of problems. But okay, let's just say that the dodge doesn't scale off anything. It's, it's charge based, right? Now, the problem with having a charge based dodge mechanic is how are you going to balance the frequency of it? Because certain attacks aren't equal. Okay, you have let's say 6 charges. If an elite moves, does that mean they take up more charges? And once those charges go off, then what happens? Is the evasion just falling off? Does this mean that in 5 targets they're dead? Like, when you try to implement a mechanic like this, it's very hard to balance something like this that hasn't been in the game since day one. And we should transition also to the balancing problems of this that are tied to the fact that HSR is a gacha game. Because dodge is binary by nature, you just you either get 100,000 damage on you or you either get 0. Dodge more often than not becomes either too good or too weak in gacha games. You could have situations where dodging just cheeses an entire boss completely and you don't need any additional mitigation, or your dodge is so limited in use that it can't stand on its own and you have to reinforce it with like shields or healing or something. And that really kind of screws up everything when you consider that, you know, this is a gacha game and you need to sell future stuff. And making a future-proof unit is generally something that you really want to avoid. Let's compare evasion to normal shields, okay? Now, normal shields are subject to power creep. They could easily just release a better shielder character right now, and that would probably get some eyes on it. But evasion isn't. It doesn't matter how high the stats of the enemy get or how high the stats of other characters get. They will still dodge and nullify to 0, which is really bad because, okay, at least with shielders, if a new light con comes out that gives them more stats, they'd be okay with it. They'd be fine with it. For an evasion character, once they hit that 100% evasion point, they don't really need it anymore. They don't need to pull any new stuff. All this to say is just an evasion mechanic would be so future-proof that it kind of ruins thinking about pulling a new sustain in the future. And you also have to consider that if they implement a dodge or evasion mechanic in this game, then the essence of fair play kind of pulls around. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if they add dodge to the player side, it's not off the table anymore that they're going to add dodge to the enemy side. And I don't think we want to deal with that, do we? I mean, the essence of fair play is always that. It happens always at some point. If you could dodge, the enemy will have a reason to dodge now that you have it. It always happens in these games. One thing too is that when they sell something like this, when they sell evasion, there is almost a 100% chance that somewhere in the future, they do guaranteed hits to control them. Again, it loops back to being either too strong that it just completely obliterates most content, or that it's so weak that you need to supply it with additional defensive utility like shields that are actually good or healing. Again, I just don't think Star Rail was built with dodge mechanics in mind, and I really don't think they will pull the trigger on it, at least for now, because again, there's so many ways that you could mess this up and forever make other sustains unpullable because of them. I'm gonna repeat this because it's very important. Either dodge is so strong that it messes up future sustains and future bosses, or dodge is just so weak and inconsistent that they would actually have to add other gimmicks that are good, like shields and heals. There's really no winning in the scenario of having just a pure dodge character. I just don't think this game is built for that, and if they do implement dodge characters, I can already tell that the enemies are gonna get a lot worse because of it. They're gonna bring more solutions to the problem that they created, like guaranteed hits. It always happens. Trust me. This is not a foreign concept. It always happens. So yeah, that's my take on the dodge mechanic and why I think they will not implement it, either, you know, because it's just too broken or it's too weak. It's a very difficult thing to balance, and I don't think HSR really was built with that sort of mechanic in mind. I mean, they've already failed once, and again, we don't know the exact scenarios of that, but I just think that the dodge mechanic, as cool as it sounds, probably will not be implemented. But yeah, thanks for watching this video. Like, subscribe, do the algorithm stuff. I should see you next week with a Ling Sha video. Yeah, that's the plan. See ya. Bye.